like to remind teams to keep your own time and don't speak past 8 minutes. Don't ask POIs out of order. If you have a preference for POI that is not the chat, I would remind you to ask or let us know right before the start of the speech, and would encourage team to ask and accept POIs. Having said that, let's call this house to order. First proposition, the floor is yours. Here.
Hi, just checking that I'm both audible and visible.
Yes to both.
Amazing, that's great to know. Cool. Yep, just give me 1 second. Yep. Panel, we are all victims of the lottery of birth. The majority of the world isn't very rich. Billions are condemned to poverty. Some of us were born with skin, the color of which is used to justify our oppression. Others have it entrenched their privilege. What we want to create on Team India is a world that acknowledges that and protects the most vulnerable in the process. What's our stance in this debate? We say that successes and failure are consequences of external random factors that you have no control over. What are some of these random factors? Things like the color of your skin, things like geography, where you're born, your country, even your zip code, because there is a massive difference between people in Mumbai's Billionaires Row and the slums of Dharavi. This looks like things like your wealth, who your parents were, your genetics, and as we know far too well on Team India, things such as your caste. On their side, the world that they need to defend is one in which the onus is pushed onto you. The reason you are not succeeding is because you made bad decisions. It's because you're not working hard enough. Before I move on to my two arguments, a few important bits of framing. First, success is always measured on academic and financial metrics. When you meet someone, what they ask you is, what do you do for work? This is true for two structural reasons. First, we live in an inherently capitalistic society, and our world is built as such. Second, humans are inherently competitive in nature. That's what human nature is. And this gives us a quantifiable metric to compete with each other on. This is the definition of success that Team Canada in this round fundamentally needs to contend with. Second important bit of framing. Contrary to what they tell you, people don't just stop working on our side of the house. The forces of capitalism are what the world is structured around, which forces competition in the first place. In school, you're always ranked and compared to the person next to you on grades. Plus, we think that you still continue wanting to work and try hard because hard work is viewed as virtuous. You think that it gives you meaning. Crucially, these forces continue to exist on either side of the house, but uniquely on Team India, they pale in comparison to the stronger narrative that there are external factors out of your control. For example, what school you went to in the first place. That is the worldview we defend. Two arguments from Team India. First, on why they spread unfair norms and justify oppression. Second, on why we create fairer and more equitable systems in society. On the first argument, the worldview of Team Canada is toxic and inherently capable to hijack by majorities and the elite who use it to entrench, legitimize, and justify their privilege and coercive and oppressive power. First important thing to note within this argument, most people cannot meet the societal standard of success. Three structural reasons this is true. First, they're disenfranchised and disprivileged. Structural barriers such as government neglect prevent you from being successful in the first place. Second, success is zero sum. Only so many people can be successful because employers just can't promote everyone to higher positions because of the structure of capitalism and because finite resources existing. Third, success to an extent always requires innate and natural talent. But let's just take them at their best. Even if you make specific choices, such as study before an exam, that maximize your probability of success, there are still so many random external causative factors that actually result in that. For instance, the only reason you're able to study before an exam and do well is because you have a parent in rural India who understands the value of education and sends you to school instead of making you plow a farm in Madhya Pradesh. Some people aren't lucky enough to have that parent and they are forced into child labor, they're forced into toxic alternatives. Second, even having a school near you in the first place, which so many children in Bolivia just don't have. Bearing that in mind, why does this Team Canada perpetrate and perpetuate injustice? Three important reasons. First, on a principle level, they ascribe immense amounts of value to a false narrative that benefits the elite. Second, They push the onus away from systems and onto individuals. It is your fault that you failed. That means that you feel guilty and internalize that you're a failure when you think you failed just because you didn't work hard enough. It was in your control. It is your fault. Third, rich people who concentrate power and have systematically subjugated you can uniquely justify their privilege in Canada's world. Is deserved. I, as a majority race, earned this. I worked hard for it. You should stop being lazy. You should earn it. That is the rhetoric of oppressors in Canada's world. That it's terrible. Before I move on to my second argument,
In a world where people don't believe hard work matters at all, how decisions get practically better on your side, given that all decisions are made up of some degree of personal contribution and some degree of random luck?
Speaker, I appreciate the fact that Canada prepped a POI and prep. I'm not sympathetic to the fact that they don't deal with my massive levels of preemption. That is to say, we already told you that there's internal norms in terms of wanting to be hardworking in the first place. That's what they actually need to contend with. Let's then move on to the second argument on why we create fairer and more equitable systems in society. First, there are structural barriers preventing minorities from succeeding. This is what I've already told you. Things like neglect, disenfranchisement, things like a dearth of intergenerational wealth. However, there's always exceptions. There's always trailblazers. This looks like Barack Obama becoming the president of America despite his race in a racist country. We think that in their world, elite and privileged people can make this exception the norm. They can tell Black people they're just not working hard enough. They're just being lazy. Obama made the right personal choices. Why aren't you? This is your fault. This is not the fault of our systems. Parable systems are uniquely shielded from accountability in opposition's world. But second, this is especially important because if privileged people exist within minorities, they attribute their own successes to their hard work, to their personal choices. Canada ruins cohesion within minority groups because individual privileged people like the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas feel no obligation towards their community, feel no incentive to actually go ahead and uplift them. Second, in our world, rich people are grateful for their wealth. They don't feel entitled to it. They don't feel like they worked hard for their wealth. They don't feel like they worked harder than you. They don't feel like they put their blood, sweat, and tears in. This was just the culmination of unfair external factors. We think that that means on net, they're more likely to feel an imperative to do things like redistribute. And that means that on our side of the house, we're more likely to end up with stronger systems of progressive taxation, which translates to more welfare that feeds the poor on the ground. We end up with greater systems of affirmative action that finally give women and Black people who've been locked out of opportunity the access to it. But third, it becomes far structurally harder to delegitimize social movements in our world. In their world, rich people can call you bitter. They can call you lazy people who are after their hard-earned money. And that means that they can uniquely shut you down. In our world, that can't happen for two important reasons. First, rich and elite people know that they've benefited off of these random external arbitrary factors that you've suffered from. We think that at the point at which they acknowledge their privilege, one, we can call them out for it and we can further mobilize against it. Two, an acknowledgement of privilege is a good in and of itself because it changes the way in which you behave. It means you're more likely to be considerate of minority groups. That's when you listen to the demands of minorities and work towards the creation of a more equitable world. Second, minorities can collectivize under our side of the house under the rallying cry of just anger against these external factors which for far too long have worked towards their subjugation. That's the only point at which you can get structural change in Team India's world. Lastly, on the criminal justice system. Look, people commit crimes because of external factors. This looks like state failure, meaning I steal a loaf of bread to feed my starving daughter or I commit petty theft. On their side, you're viewed as bad and evil, making that choice of your own volition. And that means that minorities have punitive action justified against them because it's not viewed as outside of your control. On our side, these external factors, things like state failure, are viewed as the reason you committed crime. There's less individual blame on you, and that uniquely means we can have rehabilitative efforts on our side of the house, which create far better outcomes when it comes to justice. Vote Team India.
Thank you very much. First proposition, I yield the floor to the first opposition speaker. Thank you.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
loud and clear.
I'm also gonna get my water bottle real quick. I'll take POIs in chat, by the way. Side proposition robs people of power over their own lives. They tell everyone that they are the puppets of fate, that there is nothing they can do to improve their own situations, and that under their extremely narrow definitions of success, we're the only people who can be happy, score 1600s on their SATs, or go to prestigious colleges. But that they doom the vast majority of people to very miserable, desolate lives where they feel powerless, where they feel like they have no autonomy. 3 things then Canada's going to do for you in this speech. Firstly, refutation to their first prop. Secondly, 3 substantive arguments. The first on why feeling power of agency is a recognition of dignity. The second on why people work harder and lead to more social progress. Finally, on institutional change and holding power to account. Firstly, on refutation to their first prop. I want to point out 2 issues with the way they've framed this debate. The first is that I just think it is false that the vast majority of success is only defined on financial or academic success. They're probably Goldman Sachs brothers who feel very empty in their lives because they have no fulfilling relationships. Comparatively, there are also people that live pretty humble existences, but they also have very fulfilling, happy relationships. Many ways in which people can be defined as successful and happy. Relationships are a core part of that. It is not all about the score that you get on the Gaokao or the university that you attend. The second thing that they try to do is they magically say that people are still going to work hard, but that's not something they can just assert. They actually have to prove why people have an incentive to do so on their side of the house. If you think everything is a roll of the dice, if you think everything is just a lottery, then there's absolutely no reason an on-side proposition to continue playing a game in which you have no control over whether or not you even win. Finally, 2 things with their first argument. First thing to point out is just that there's different ideas and different fields in which people can always succeed, and not everything's entirely zero sum. This will be expanded on in substantive, but ideas of relationships in which people can feel even happier when they put effort into them. Those things are incredibly meaningful and fulfilling that they don't get. Secondly, they point out that this means that the elite people are going to be more willing to do things like social support those that are oppressed or born into more unfortunate situations. The first point of refutation to this is that social support is more about empathy and less about rather the idea of moral desert. So in many ways, when you hand money to a homeless person on the street, you don't fact check as to what their situation was or whether or not they deserve to be in that situation, but rather people are inherently empathetic and are willing to do so. When we provide things like universal healthcare, which almost every major developed country has, that is not on the basis of whether or not you deserve to be getting treatment, but the fact that we empathize with people and provide it for them anyways. If you have a son with a drug problem, even though it is maybe likely that there's some degree of control over that, it is more about empathy that extends you help rather than the idea of moral desert. The second thing to point out is that they have no link at all between the idea of you feeling like your luck and wealth is deserved versus having a social obligation. So if I found $100 on the ground, that doesn't mean that I'm more likely to donate it to charity than to keep it to myself. They have no link proven there. Final thing to point out is that the idea of moral desert and that billionaires are more willing to donate to charity on their side is not true. Moral desert was an idea that was manufactured by the wealthy to maintain their class interest. It is not the starting point, but rather a justification. In the absence of the idea that people do not deserve their lack of success, they're finding other ways to oppose things like money redistribution, which makes their argument very unlikely. First point then as to why people get agency on our side of the house, and that is inherently fulfilling. One of the core recognitions of your dignity is a recognition of your autonomy over your own life, that you have free will, that you're in control of what you do in the situations that you end up in, that you captain the ship rather than float down the current. For example, on our side of the house, we give terminal illness patients the idea and abilities to have autonomy over their treatment, over their choices, about how they choose to spend their last days on earth, even though in many ways their autonomy was taken away from them. And that is because we recognize that in order for people to feel fulfilled, in order for people to feel happy, they need to feel like they have power, that they have free will, that they're not just kicked around by the universe or born into an unfortunate situation and spend their lives bemoaning that. That means that there are 3 reasons then as to why agency is better on our side. The first is that it gives people hope that things can be improved. It is an incredibly nihilistic view for side proposition to say that the vast majority of people will simply feel like they were born down on their luck and that they will live for the rest of their lives down on the luck. The people on our side of the house feel as though they have agency and power and can improve their situations. And that is an inherently hopeful feeling, regardless of the outcome. The second thing on our side, though, is that this actually cushions feelings of failure, which directly engages with a lot of propositions material about feeling guilty. On their side of the house, it is not reassuring to think that you lost or that you failed because of random chance. In many ways, it is actually incredibly frustrating. It makes you feel powerless. It makes you feel like there is nothing that you can do. But on our side, if it is a result of personal action, then in many ways that will motivate people that they have the chances to improve, that they can do better, that they can fix things, that there is room to go upwards rather than simply sit there. The final thing that points out is that it makes success more enjoyable on our side of the house, where you feel like you have a role in doing it, where you feel like you actually contributed to that outcome. On our side of the house, we recognize that a core way to make people happy, to recognize their dignity, is to recognize that they have agency. Before I move on, I'll take the POI.
Mukesh Ambani is a billionaire businessman. Would you be fine with him telling Dalit people in rural India that the reason why they're poor and unsuccessful is they're being lazy and not working hard enough? If not, how would he explain his privilege to them?
Okay, the problem with the argument was not the idea that what he says was wrong, but that he'll change what he says on your side of the house. There's absolutely no reason why he'd be suddenly more willing to give away his wealth on your side of the house because he thinks that people are undeserving of luck. People like to hold onto their wealth and enjoy the privileges of a luxury life. They manufacture other excuses in order to keep it, the same way I'd manufacture excuses to keep a $100 bill on the ground. And I'm sure that almost everyone else in this room would do the exact same thing. Second idea then on how people are more productive and lead to more social progress. Here's the key frame. The vast majority of situations where people are making a calculus about whether or not to apply themselves are made from a position of blindness, where the role of chance or the role of hard work is often quite ambiguous. So when you're opening your business, you have no idea how the economy is going to fare in 2 years. When you're making investments, when you're thinking about dating a prospective person, we would prefer that people default on our side of the house to applying themselves, to feeling that they can take personal action and investing the work in, for two main reasons. The first is there are clear instances where effort does have a direct and noticeable correlation on the improvement of your situation. This is not necessarily strictly financial or academic situations, as Prop narrows this debate to, but on your relationships. If you put effort into paying attention to your partner, about doing good things and nice things for your anniversary, spending time with your partner, caring about your children, there's an almost guaranteed chance that those relationships will be better, more fulfilling, more happy. And relationships are some of the most meaningful and fulfilling parts of people's lives. They prioritize being a good parent, being a good partner, over being a good employee. In many ways, this will make people much more happy. The second reason, though, is that there are instances in which hard work and personal action can maximize your own opportunities for success. So sure, maybe it is somewhat random which hiring manager happens to like you, but you can increase your chances of having that good luck if you send out a lot of applications, if you make the effort to network with a lot of people. These are instances in which work, putting in personal action and taking accountability actually does matter. Through three impacts of this then. Firstly, on innovation and social progress. Every part of social progress has been driven by somebody that believed that their actions could better the world. A scientist that did the 1,000th trial because they actually could believe that they could make some sort of breakthrough. An economist that would toy with fiscal policy because they believed that there was a way you could cushion the effects of random chance. Social progress is an outcome of people feeling their personal action has impacts. Second impact on why people enjoy smaller wins and are more resilient on our side of the house, because on their side of the house, people give up after failure. They feel like there is nothing they can do. Finally, people get more satisfaction with the job well done on our side of the house, regardless of the outcome. They feel as though they put in effort and that was inherently fulfilling regardless of outcome. Thirdly, and finally, on how institutions and you hold power to account. The idea of accountability derives from an idea of agency and control. If bad things are perceived as inevitable, it gives corrupt leaders on their side of the house the ability to skirt accountability by saying the economy was in random flux, rather than having it be believably chalked up to things like bad fiscal policy, mismanagement, or actively malicious harms like siphoning off money. On their side of the house, they cannot hold people to account if everything is random chance, because they believe no one has agency, no one has control, and no one can dictate how their own lives end up. For all these reasons, we're incredibly proud to oppose.
Thank you very much. First up, and I'll call the next speaker, second prop. Here.
Hi, just checking that we're audible and visible again.
Yes, very much so.
Yep. Can everybody hear and see me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I need a timer. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. I'm going to begin the speech with a little bit of weight. Even in their absolute best case scenario, if they're able to motivate some people, I want to be very clear. They're only going to be motivating or successfully leading those individuals to achieve success in very small numbers. That is, you're only going to have 3 or 4 people who are actually going to attain that success on their side of the house, even if there is motivation, given that there are a lot of societal factors that are there. Which means that if they at all get their benefits of being able to motivate people, they only affect a very small number of people. I want you to take a step back and contrast that to the argument that we gave in our first speech. That is, on our side, we are aiming at getting rid of societal structures that work against you, which means we make it easier for every single person, right? So on weighing, our side of the house helps and affects more people because societal structures that are against you affect more people in volume, whereas on their side of the house, even if they do motivate you, it'll only be 3 or 4 people who can actually overcome those societal factors. So on weighing, we think we've already won this clash because of the fact that our side helps more individuals. My substantive is about how we're actually going to approach failure, which is in direct response to a lot of the stuff that they had on innovation and trying. But before that, I want to deal with 3 questions in this speech. Firstly, on what this narrative is actually about. Secondly, on why we think that this is inherently wrong as a worldview. And thirdly, why we get better change. Firstly, in terms of what this narrative is actually about, they say that success in this debate is not purely about academics and money, but they never responded to the mechanism that we had in our first speech, right? That there are capitalist incentives that exist in society, that there are incentives in society that want to make success elusive. So making it so easy as to, like, I don't know, having fun, being happy, those are things anyone can do, right? But in order to actually make success something that is valuable, you need to make it exclusive. And we think they have an incentive to do that. They never responded to the mechanism we gave. They cannot just counter assert whatever they want, which means we think in the overwhelming number of instances, success will be defined using these metrics. Secondly, they say that people won't work on our side. We think it's rather uncharitable coming from Team Canada that on our side of the house, people are just going to be zombies and not work at all. Because let's be very clear. Even in a world where there's a lottery and the odds are stacked against you, you still try, right? You still want to make money in those cases. And the reason for that is because there are things that motivate you outside of this, right? The fact that you can get more money, the fact that you can get stability, which means even if the odds are stacked against you, you still want to put pressure on these societal factors on our side of the house. So it's not true that people are going to be paralyzed into inaction. We think it's uncharitable coming from their side. They need to respond to the actual case that we brought forward. Now I want to talk about, secondly, why we think that this is inherently wrong. Our first speaker very clearly laid out that this is a worldview that the rich can use and the powerful can use to justify their position in society, that they worked hard to come here, that it's your fault that it's poor, that you're poor because you made the choice to stay down there. This is a false narrative, which we think happens because the rich did accumulate wealth. That is, they have advantages over that of poor. And then it's the nature of life that there are limited chances or limited abilities to get success. Their response is, oh, people are empathetic. Look at the developed world. Outside of the fact this happens in developing nations too, we think that this response is crazy. We're not saying that rich people are evil, but that rich people don't feel as guilty on their side of the house when they can always say that they made the choice to come here. It's about the comparative, right? No one's going to fix everything, but we think comparatively, rich people feel less bad on their side of the house when they can say that, when they can basically say that it's that they earned to do this. Then they talked about how you need to feel the sense of agency and hope. The issue with this argument is that in society, you have very less agency and there are societal structures that work against you. And the reason we know this is because it's just not true that everyone can feel agency, right? Like, I mean, it's not true that every poor person is getting into a top university. It's a very small number of people. So their principle only affects a very small group of individuals. Their principle is also wrong. It's just not true that you have that much agency. So you're lying to people, getting them to work really, really hard, only to realize that they don't have agency at the end of the day because there's something wrong with them and wrong with their personal beliefs. They say that you should feel the benefit of success, but on your side, success is only personal, right? It's only you as an individual. On our side of the house, success is better because success involves things like banding together as minority communities to try to take down these societal structures. And you clearly tell the difference between the rich and the poor, which means on their side of the house, we don't understand why this principle weighs out of the debate. Our side clearly said that this is something the rich can use and their responses don't hold. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about Thank you. Their side rushed this argument in like the last 10 seconds of their speech, where basically they're like, politicians can say, oh, we're not going to fix societal structures. It's too hard to do that. I mean, they're anyway skewed against you. Now, this is absurd, right? Because when you can clearly do things like invest in more schools, right? When you can clearly do things like try to bridge the gap through affirmative action policies, things that we concretely laid out, we don't actually think that it's the case that politicians can do that. It's on your side of the house, in contrast, where politicians say that it's on you, that you have an ability. They point to Obama and they point to successful people who they call role models and say, why can't you just be like them? Which distracts the conversation from the actual societal factors that you need to be directing attention towards, right? They say the rich won't donate on either side, and they think they're really smart when they use this example of you finding $10 and not giving that money to anyone. Let's be very clear about the comparative. On our side, you find $10 and you think that you don't deserve this. You're more likely to give that to someone. On their side, you think you earned it, that you have a right to this. You're never going to give it to someone. It's the comparative, which means that they can't just wash everything out of the debate like they always do. Okay, I'll take a POI.
Sure. So our contention was that there's no link between finding something out of pure luck and having an obligation to give it to society. You need to prove why the rich feel guilty, why they are responsible for the poor people's condition.
Because
assert
they
that
don't
they didn't earn their money.
Exactly, because they don't feel like they have earned this, which means it's easier for other people to say it's unfair, and they can't always come back on them and say, no, we actually did it. That is a much more likely world in which they're likely to do this. This is a debate about likelihood, right? Okay, my substantive is about how our side actually views things like failure. Because in a world where you say success is due to your personal choices, let's be clear, failure is also due to your personal choices. It's a world where you're always told you're never good enough because look at that classmate who did better than you. Look at that more successful neighbor who's a doctor. You're just a teacher. This creates two harms. Firstly, it creates mental burnout, right? Because you're pushing yourself beyond the limit. That there's societal structures you're trying to overcome and overcome and overcome, and you exhaust yourself because the odds are stacked against you in those specific cases. And you're told that you're a horrible person and you have lots of self-hate in those cases, which we think is really problematic, right? Because that is a world in which people do not necessarily like themselves as much. On our side, that doesn't happen because you can blame these societal factors and take action against them. But secondly, we think you're afraid of failure on your side because every time you fail, it's on you. It's your fault that you failed in society, right? It's not due to random factors. So what that means is every time I want to try something, every time I want to actually innovate, I'm afraid of failure because people can always say, you're a loser, you failed multiple times. On our side, we normalize failure, right? Because in a society where it's not about personal choice, but rather about other factors, you can always use those other factors to shield yourself, to like try multiple times and then eventually get the hang of it. And that's really, really important under our side of the house because we actually have innovation. And you're more likely to feel happy in your work because on their side of the house, even though you put in all of this work and you fail, you blame yourself because your work didn't lead to that. Even in our cases that you don't necessarily achieve that success, you're happy that despite the fact that you worked so hard, you're still really happy that you worked so hard because that's not the reason that you ultimately failed. Which means on our side, businesses and people are more willing to take on risks because they're not afraid of failure. That is a significantly better world that actually gets all of the benefits that they talked about in terms of innovation. For all of these reasons, we think our worldview is significantly more likely to actually get societal change for the most vulnerable. Remember the weighing at the top of this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Second prompt. I now call upon second on. Thank you.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Okay, I'd prefer to do POIs verbally. A life without choice, even if it is smoother, is hollow and is drained of meaning. In the attempt to eliminate the difficult things of the human experience, the guilt and moral failure of being alive, proposition also eliminates what is most valuable about existence, the ability to engage in the world as a moral agent, the ability to hope, and the ability to long for a better life. We prefer an emotionally rich life, one marked by highs and lows, to one in which people are trapped by the cage of entropy. That is why we are proud to oppose. I'm going to talk about three things in this speech. First, I'll talk about proposition's central claim in terms of whether or not they do in fact reform social structures. Second of all, in terms of how individuals interact with opportunity. And third, on meaning and hope. On the first issue,
Proposition's main claim in this debate is that you are likely to reform social structures through acknowledging the role that random factors play in individual success. The first thing to say is that, and this is what we point out from first, is that underlying class interests are likely to manifest in other ways. And I want to note that they concede some element of this. They start their claim by saying elites use the narrative of personal choice in order to retain wealth and political power. And we agree to an extent that people like being rich and in control over politics and will spin narratives accordingly. Interestingly, I think the example that they talk about in terms of caste actually works well for us here. People in India do not think that you have personal control over which caste you are in currently, because it's obviously untrue and you're obviously just born into a particular caste. So instead, they create the elites in control, create other narratives in order to justify class oppression. They say that people in certain castes are dirty or degenerated, that there are cultural problems, and maybe they even use proposition's narrative. They argue that there are things like genetic determinants, which mean that these people will inherently be less successful or less palatable in some way. And clearly, similar types of rhetoric can extend to other contexts in which you currently use the excuse of choice. It is very plausible to say that in Western countries, you can just stigmatize poverty through saying that people in lower classes are degenerated or dirty in the same way. I mean, this is probably even more harmful than arguing that it's a result of personal factors, insofar as you push that it's something inherent to those people as a class in a way which prohibits the possibility of them ever rising through social ranks. The second, and I think more fundamental problem with this argument is that it is just deeply unclear throughout the case how they solve for this problem. The extent of this argument that I think is reasonable is that things are random, but it's unclear why they improve consciousness of things like social discrimination or racial oppression. They say two things. They say rich people feel guilt. I'm not sure why this is the case, given there's probably underlying psychological incentives to not want to reconcile with the harms of your actions. So you're likely to feel cognitive dissonance over this. This is why lottery winners don't donate more of their money than billionaires in the status quo, because there are clear financial and personal incentives for them to want to keep their money rather than randomly giving it all away. We think lots of rich people are like insulated from the harms of things like poverty and just don't care that much about it on a personal level. And secondly, they say other people feel more sympathy in some sort of abstract moral way. This is, I think, unresponsive, firstly, to the baseline moral incentives that we characterize in first, in terms of why norms are likely to develop in such a way that prioritizes empathy towards people in other social situations above whether or not they were morally deserving of things. I think this trend has already happened in the Western world to a degree. The reason why you have public healthcare infrastructure in almost every single Western country, I'll take you in a second, or the reason why you give money to the homeless is not because you have deep knowledge of whether or not they are morally deserving of a thing, but rather because there are some human entitlements that we think are inherent to people's existence regardless of choice. So that mitigates the argument at the very least. And here's the flip at the end of this, is that a random world means that you are likely to place blame for failures on random things. So things like, and Star tells you this from first, right? The leaders do things like blame an oil spill on a mistake in the machine, or they say things like we don't have full control over our operations or what lower ranked people were doing. What happens in our world is that the personal actions of leaders are seen as a key determinant behind overall social failings. So you can point to people in positions of leadership and say their personal failures or their personal actions are the reason why we get broader social success and social failure. And I think that's a reasonable interpretation of the motion insofar as personal actions can also apply to leaders. This is important because power is realistically concentrated in a few people at the top of a socioeconomic ladder. 70% of climate change is caused by 100 companies and CEOs. If you look at key geopolitical conflicts like the Iraq War, it was essentially concocted by like 3 guys in George Bush's cabinet. So what happens in this world is that we gain the ability to assign blame to key individuals who are responsible for social failure, rather than the abstraction of just having to blame it on like an entropic society overall. And so individuals are more likely to hold those powerful people accountable through the mechanisms like voting, through boycotting, and through creating social narratives to dismantle these people, rather than just being able to do very little and feeling broadly nihilistic about the way that social systems operate. Before I talk about individual hard work, I'll take the point.
If the rich and powerful have the same incentive on both sides, is it easier when we can call them out and they say that they deserve it because they're on the moral high ground, or in a world where they assert that they deserve this because they're in the upper caste?
So I think I just spent a significant amount of time responding to this. We think saying randomness is responsible for a situation is not equivalent to saying that person is responsible for social harm. We get the latter in our side of house. So given that they do not significantly fix the problem of social failure, they need to then explain why it is worse for people on an individual level to try harder than to not try at all. We said you will work harder in a variety of situations, like relationships, like learning, like careers. And it's just kind of assertive throughout the proposition case that individual choices don't matter. And notice that proving structural factors exist does not logically entail that people cannot impact their own lives in any capacity. The core thing to note is that in either world, there are reasonable limits of plausibility on what you can achieve. If you are 4 feet tall, you're not joining the NBA in either world. But the vast majority of people can make incremental changes in their lives towards making a better life. So if you spend more time with your partner and say more meaningful things towards them, it's likely that you become closer. If you read for an hour a day, it's probably likely that you gain more knowledge about the world. And I think they concede this because despite arguing throughout their case that personal choice matters very little, they also say you'll work hard because of internal norms. And it's criminally vague, first of all. I have no idea what they mean by these internal norms. We think these norms are constructed by the narrative of personal actions in our world. And then they say you want to make money, so you'll work hard in either case, which violates the basic trade-off of the motion, which is to say, if you don't think that hard work will lead to success, then this incentive doesn't exist. So what we're left with then is that people are likely to improve their life situations in significant ways. And then they try to conveniently frame relationships out of the debate, probably because it's bad for their case. They say capitalist societies don't care about relationships. A, there are non-capitalist societies in the East. B, even within capitalist societies, there are strong traditionalist norms which value family, and people do in fact compare themselves to other people based on like how good their families or partners are. So that deals with the competition element of their case. So people gain the possibility of making their lives better through spending more time with their families, for example, through reading more, through putting more effort into things that are meaningful to them, whether or not it is in a financial context or not. Lastly, they don't deal with our argumentation significantly on innovation and why this isn't zero sum. We need more responsiveness for third. Lastly, on meaning and hope. And this is important in terms of weighing because proposition has very speculative and uncertain impacts on overall structures. And at best, they might gain like probably marginal things on a social level given class interests. What is certain in this round is the microscopic impacts this has upon people's lives individually. This was not a principle, to be clear, and it did not affect a small group of people, as they say, without much substantiation. It affected everyone who values the ability to engage in choice on an individual level. Notice the intuition behind this, that I actually don't know what my writing says here, that the ability to get results and to live a meaningful life will require some belief in the fact that you can change your circumstances. The reason why treatments like dialectical behavioral therapy, designed for those who are depressed and nihilistic, focus heavily on the capacity to alter our lives as individuals is because it unlocks the possibility of something better rather than being stuck where you are. This is why we value things like democracy and political freedom, why people in Tunisia and Hong Kong die in masses for speech and expression, because autonomy is the genesis of meaning insofar as it allows us to see a future that is better than the one currently. When all of life is a lottery, most tickets are losing. We're very proud to oppose.
Thank the second op for the speech and yield the floor to the third prop. Thank you. Third prop.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. I'll take POIs audibly. Please don't put them in the chat. I won't be checking the chat. And pulling up my timer. 1 sec. Yeah, okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The reason why Canada's first speaker didn't actually give you a response to our POI was because they recognized that we were true, right? The fact that there are a number of individuals, the most vulnerable right now, who actually have to suffer, who are oppressed because of factors that are beyond their control, beyond their agency. And on their side of the house, you blame them for it. That's something that India will never be willing to stand for. I have 3 clashes in this speech done. Firstly, on principle. Secondly, on which side gets better institutional change. And thirdly, the way that we deal with failure and success. Before I move on to my first clash, I just want to do a crucial piece of framing about why this is at the end of the day about wealth and academics. Canada tries to make it not to be. I'll give you reasons for why it is. Firstly, we already told you that capitalistic societies value this a lot. And they can't come up here and claim, oh, capitalism also values your family. Because sure, the person who's working so hard, 9 to 10 hours in a day, really loves their family because that's why they're going back home to spend a lot of time with them, right? But secondly, we told you that people value success because it's objective, because they can compare this with this. And the reason why this doesn't apply to relationships is because of two reasons. One, in most instances, no relationship is objectively bad or a failure. My relationship with my sister will be very different from the relationship that someone else has with their sister. But you have no objective metric to compare that with. But secondly, you think you're successful because that's all you know. That you, for instance, you can't see your relationship behind closed doors. You can't see, for instance, how different people are reacting to other people. That means you literally cannot compare relationships. On the other hand, it's really easy to compare the amount of money you're earning. I can do it anytime. What this means is that this is not a debate about relationships. But even if it is, I'll just wait it out. Because guess what? In their absolute best case, you get slightly more time with your families. You spend 2 to 3 days more with it. I'll prove to you why any of the impacts that India claims are just significantly more valuable than that. Because recognized families will always be there for you. Narratives about unconditional love do exist. First clash done on the principle. What did we get from them here? That individuals just value their autonomy and agency a lot. I have 3 responses to this. First, individuals still retain their agency to a large part of the life, right? The fact that you still choose the clothes that you wear, the fact that you still choose, for instance, the what you're talking about and your speech. They need to prove to us why this has to be the tipping point, still haven't proven it to us. But secondly, notice there are a large part of individuals right now that don't have any agency. The fact that minorities are still people who don't have any agency on their side of the house, at least we're not lying to them and blaming it for that. But lastly, I just want to weigh over this because notice in the democracies that they wanted to talk about, individuals just are okay with giving up their agency when they do things like subscribe to laws. That is to say, they give government the monopoly of overpower for them, allow them, for instance, to put them in jail, allow them, for instance, to hold them accountable for not following laws because they recognize that that's what's fair, because that's what's true, and that's what's best for everyone. But lastly, on the comparative, what did we tell you? We told you that this is really unfair at the point at which you're benefiting from arbitrary privilege, you're benefiting from arbitrary innate talent, and that's what we uniquely hold an obligation to minorities to make sure that they are not blamed for that on their side of the house. Second clash done on institutional change. What did we tell you? We told you that you're much more likely to push for policies that reverse structural factors on our side of the house. And we did this through a number of stakeholders. Let's analyze all of them. Firstly, on the rich, you recognize that you don't deserve your success, you don't own it, but rather it's caused by a number of random factors. What were the responses that we heard to this? Oh, firstly, that these are individuals who are empathetic, or the individuals aren't empathetic, but rather they don't care about moral research. Firstly, notice you still affect individuals who are empathetic because what you do on their side of the house is you make them believe that you're actually, for instance, doing what's best for poor people by not giving them the cash transfers they need, because that's when they're going to stop being lazy. That's when they're going to go out and get the job. So we do impact those individuals. But secondly, a large part of people do care about moral desert, and their response about, oh, they'll just find other reasons to do this won't be enough. Because one, notice a lot of rich people aren't actively horrible. They aren't actively out here to get black people on the ground. Rather, they genuinely think that they're on a moral high ground. We take away that reason. But thirdly, if there are certain individuals that find other reasons, notice those other reasons will always hold less value in society. It's significantly easier to disprove them. They never really told us what those other reasons would actually look like. And on weighing, notice this is really important because sure, we don't get all rich people starting voting for redistribution, but some do. And that is still a massive change because even one rich person is able to give you large amounts of money, large amounts of political capital that you have with governments that social movements really lack on their side of the house. But second, let's add on to this. Let's add on another stakeholder, the fact that you actually get corporations also wanting to push governments to give you structural change. And the reason for that is that corporations want the best people working for them, want to be successful. On their side of the house, they don't want minorities working for them because they see them as lazy, see them as people who won't actually succeed in their work culture. On our side of the house, when they recognize there are random factors that are holding them back from discovering the best people out there, that's when they actually have to agency to implement change. But lastly, notice we give you another stakeholder, the fact there are social movements, right? And we told you two things about them. One, because it's easier to collectivize on their side of the house, on our side of the house. On the comparative, it's always individual. Any hard work you put in will always be individualized. They'll never get that rallying call on their side of the house. But second, that the minorities in power actively want to work on social movements on our side of the house because they think they owe them something, because they recognize that they can't be superior or the minority who is actually the best, rather than they were the minority who got lucky and owe it back to other communities to give them all of this back. What does this mean, right? This means on our side of the house, you get much push for change on our side. No, thank you. But secondly, let's deal with this argument about you blame intrinsic and inherent factors. I have two responses to this. First, recognize that if you come up and say, for instance, the reason why women aren't succeeding is because they're women, is because of their gender, the sort of society we live in, the liberal and progressive society that all of us are a part of, will actively riot on the ground. But secondly, even if they do, one, it's easier to disprove this for social movements. For instance, they can just show you actual scientific evidence that they already exist right now in the status quo and show to you that this isn't true. However, it's much harder to prove that these individuals aren't lazy because that's something that's no objective metric to measure. But secondly, notice at least you're still able to hold them accountable. At least, for instance, minorities don't think the onus is on them. Before I move on, PY very quickly.
So our agency claim was not a normative argument. It was that in your world, people can never feel pride or achievement over success because they did not contribute. So even if there is more opportunity that minorities gain, it is not meaningful for them because they don't feel happy.
You get happiness from a number of other things. So you're successful. Sure, maybe you're not successful because you were the one who put in effort, but you're still pretty damn happy because of the fact that you get more money, because you can buy your family the new shining gift that they really wanted to. I think that's enough for happiness. Lastly, then, on dealing with this argument quickly on corruption, firstly, these are people who are clearly bad. That means that on your side of the house, they'll just find another reason to actually hide the stuff that they're doing. But secondly, we're still able to hold them accountable on our side of the house. It doesn't matter because they're due to random factors. You still want to make sure that someone will be successful and get you the policies that you need, because that's the material thing. On our side, at the end of this class, you want to know that these are the most vulnerable that we affect. On failure and success, first we give you there are a number of incentives to be successful anyway. We heard no response to any of this, all of that stands. But secondly, we told you that what happens on your side of the house that we're less likely to work hard because the fact that you still continued working hard. You put in effort, you pulled all the all-nighters you needed to, but still were unsuccessful on their side of the house because the fact that capitalist society is zero-sum. That's when individuals start blaming themselves. And that's really bad because individuals are inherently more likely to blame themselves, inherently more likely to feel more insecure about themselves. At least on our side of the house, you give them a random factor that they can externalize the guilt on. So proud to propose.
I thank the third proposition for the speech and yield the floor to the third out.
Hello, can I be heard? Great.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, I will take verbal POIs. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Proposition in this round gives you a case that is very rhetorically strong. They talk to you a lot about billionaires not deserving wealth and about people who are in situations where they have little agency over their own lives. What they do not give you is an analytical case that proves why those problems will be solved. We say on our side, when life is a lottery, most tickets are losing. Two themes in this debate. Firstly, on individual people and how they experience this theme. And secondly, on the improvement of broader social structures. So to get right in, before I go into that, right, what is included in this round? So they give you reasons throughout each of their speeches as to why capitalism causes people to see money as successful, and also why money is an objective metric, so they're likely to be successful. What they do not give you reasons for as to why these are the only things that can be seen as metrics of success to the exclusion of everything else. And so we think, yes, in some cases, career success will be seen as success. That's obvious. But we think in other cases, things that people obviously value, like family and relationships, will also be seen as success. We think this is because people can still care about internal goals. They can still care about things that are difficult to quantify. And obviously, if they care about family and they have successful, enjoyable relationship with family, that qualifies as a success in the mind of that person. Into this first theme then on individual people. What do we tell you at the top of first? We say, in life, there is a big amount of reasons that affect failure or success in any situation. We agree, and we're willing to give proposition this round here, that there are environmental factors that affect success and failure. We also think that in most situations, there are aspects of individual can control that can improve your outcome in the situation, or if you don't take that action, disprove it. We think that people in these situations, importantly, don't actually know to what extent their hard work is going to matter. So if you go into a job interview, it might be that the interviewer is racist and will never hire you, but it might also be that if you speak well and you answer the questions quite nicely, then you will get the job. People can't know going in. And the weighing we give you in first that's never responded to is, if there are many, many problems that people face in life, some of these problems being unsolvable and some of them being solvable with hard work and effort, we would prefer everyone to err on the side of applying effort and solve some of their problems than having everyone err on the side of thinking problems are insoluble and caused by random factors and attempting to address none of them. That is the core weighing within our point from first that was never adequately addressed. Before I move on, I'll take a POI.
For the first time in this debate, could you respond to our third argument on why people are more likely to innovate and take risks in a world where they're not afraid of failure?
I'll deal with your third argument later in this theme. Thank you. So other than the actual benefits of trying, which by the way, they try to absurdly deny throughout this round, it's just clearly true that if you work overtime, you'll have more money. Even in second, they concede that people on their side of the house still work because they want stability and money. So clearly agency has some role in securing economic stability. Clearly, if you spend more time with your family, if you spend more time finding out what their interests are and giving gifts that are meaningful to them, clearly you access some benefit on our side. These are material benefits and they're really important. Why are they really important? Because every single human being has relationships and almost every single human being is participating in school or work. And even marginal or gradual improvements on some of the problems they face in these spheres is very, very significant in this round because of the sheer breadth of people we help in aspects of life that they have no case for. The second thing we say here, which isn't a principle, by the way, is autonomy is inherently valuable, that even if you can't control your life, it's good to feel in control. Why is this a case? We think a core aspect of their case is just kind of asserting that it's a bad thing to blame people for things they can't control. But the weighing we again give you in first is that it is better to feel guilty about failure than to feel frustrated about failure you can't control. And the reason for that structurally is that when you feel guilty about failure, you necessarily think that you can improve your outcome in future situations, right? Because you feel guilty because you didn't try hard enough, and therefore you feel in future instances where this problem comes up, you can do better. Whereas on their side, when you fail, you don't just fail in that discrete instance, you fail in every single aspect of that instance as it proceeds throughout your life. You have no opportunity to improve your condition, you're just the subject of random factors. That was our autonomy argument. It had anything to do with like being able to try on clothes or being subject to laws. It's about controlling your life outcomes. The only other thing is, there are people with no agency, they say. And I think this is just untrue. Even in the people who are subject to the worst kinds of racism and sexism, who has very little control over their own lives, there is still a margin here. Because what they say when people are not subject to agency is they say, these people could literally do anything, and their life outcomes would not change. That's just absurd. If you don't show up to work, even if you are discriminated against heavily at work, obviously there's some margin of impact there. That response does make sense. Briefly on their third argument then, what do they say? Well, they say, if you're afraid of failure, then you're not going to apply yourself to innovation. So the first thing to note here is there's no tipping point, right? Obviously, status quo, people can recognize the balance between these things, and people still innovate even though they think to some extent innovation is about random factors. So we think on our side, we still get innovation. Second thing to note is that there's a flip to this argument, and that's that if people never recognize that things can be their fault, that failure is their fault, then why do they have an incentive to improve or apologize? So if you're a careless husband and you forget your wife's anniversary, why don't you just attribute that to structural factors, forgetfulness, or her not reminding you, or her being sensitive? Why do you ever improve? And this is true on a structural level as well. And the final thing is, I think for innovation, uniquely, you need individuals to push. You need people who are willing to spend weeks and weeks in a lab, grinding away at formulas, trying different equations, not willing to give up under any circumstance. That's a unique form of hard work that they can't get on their side. They might prove to you that people will work to subsist. They cannot prove to you that people will push themselves to the bone for innovation. Massive harm on their side. And this is a really important theme because we say on our side, every single human being feels better about their life. Every single human being has a better life at the point in which they apply themselves, and we get technological process because people are willing to put in the hard work necessary for innovation. Second theme then on social improvement. What is their social improvement argument? Well, they have a few mechanisms here that they give, but the primary one is rich people will know that they don't deserve their money. Therefore, they will think I better give some of this money to other people because they'll be guilty. But the missing link that we point out down bench that they don't adequately deal with is where the guilt comes from. Why is it that when I get money that I don't deserve, that implicitly means that I have guilt for something else, that I caused another problem? That's not a link that they establish. And we give you a lot of intuitions about this, right? When you pick up $5 on the sidewalk, you didn't deserve that money, but you don't feel guilty for poverty for picking up that money. And therefore, it's unclear why rich people increasingly donate on their side of the house. The second mechanism they give is a bunch of reasons as to why, like, currently there's not social programs because people just want to give money to those who deserve it, and they think a lot of poor people don't deserve it. So we have a few responses here. The first one is there's a baseline level of empathy people have for the sick and dying, right? And that's not something that they could prove doesn't exist on their side of the house. If people are willing to give money, regardless of moral desert, they will do it on both sides. We get a baseline level of care. The second thing we say, more importantly, is that both rich and poor people have class interests. That means that rich people will find other reasons to justify not donating, to keep their money that they like, and poor people will still have reasons to ask for that money on both sides of the house. What do they say? Well, they essentially say, we never tell you the specific reasons, so this can't happen. So here are a few. One, rich people, as they do status quo, might just allege the government is corrupt and not give money on that justification. Two, they might allege the institutions themselves fail at redistributing the money and they don't give it there. Three, they might just say the market does a better job at ameliorating these conditions and keep their money. These are all things that are perfectly possible on their side of the house that are likely for the analysis we gave you. But our institutional change analysis was not this ridiculous. It was that given that an institutional policy can succeed or fail, given that a program on policy or poverty can succeed or fail, we should attribute the failings of that program to the people who caused it to fail. The rich tycoons that are causing millions and millions of carbon to be emitted into the air, the people who decided the Iraq war would happen. These people need to be held accountable on their side of the house, and you uniquely get accountability at the point at which you assign personal responsibility to individual people. One last response to their argument on institutional change, and that is on their side of the house, rich people also don't feel responsible. They also don't feel like they can control poverty as a fraction of their personal action. Jeff Bezos doesn't feel responsible for the conditions of workers in his factory, so their argument washes out there. We prove the important theme here, and we flip their theme on social change. For those reasons, oppose.
Thank you very much for the opposition. We'll now move to the reply section of this debate, and I'll call upon the opposition reply. Here.
To their credit, Team India's case in this round was robust everywhere except where the links that mattered the most. The ideas of why guilt actually leads to feelings of social obligation, donations for social good, the reasons as to why people would continue to work hard when everything in their life was just a gamble, that their own personal actions meant nothing to the cold face of fate, or even the proof as to why social barriers mean that vast majorities of people simply give up and sit there and realize that they have no control over their own lives. If they cannot prove these links, and it's far too late to do it in proper reply, then they can't really claim the impacts that they give on their side of the house, of billionaires suddenly feeling incredibly generous, or of people still deciding that they will work hard to improve their situations despite knowing that their actions don't matter. Two things I want to discuss in this round then. Firstly, do people enjoy agency on their side of the house? Secondly, can people better their lives with that agency? Firstly, as to whether or not people enjoy agency on their side, our claim was really straightforward, and it was not a principle. It was the idea that one of the most dignifying, one of the most important recognitions of the human condition is the recognition of your autonomy. The idea that you are a free, independent, moral agent, that decisions that you make have an impact on your life and on your social standing. On their side of the house, they rob people of that. They tell them that they can replace it with trite things like how you dress or who you hang out with. But these are obviously minuscule and infinitesimally insignificant compared to the large life decisions that people want to have control over. On their side of the house, no matter how hard you study for that test, no matter how hard you try to get that job, to even win that debate round, none of it even matters. That you were, for lack of a better word, screwed from the get-go because you couldn't make any impact because your personal actions had no result or any impact whatsoever. The reason this agency point is important is for two reasons. It should be weighed as the most important theme in this round. One, on just pure likelihood of impact. We argue, and we both sides agree, that success is largely speculative, that they're probably a combination of factors. But what is guaranteed in this round is that when people feel powerless, they feel awful. They feel like they cannot change their situations. They feel like they are doomed. That is something that they need to recognize and haven't dealt with. The second reason of weighing, though, is just on the best and worst case scenario. On our side of the house, on their side of the house, they cannot enjoy success because they felt like they had no role in it whatsoever. But they also feel like failure is horrible because you just get frustrated at the fact that you've had no control. That's not a reassuring thing so much as it feels like you are being caged in. So on people feeling like they're moral agents, on people feeling they have autonomy that matters to them, that give them control and let them be the captain of their own lives, proposition clearly loses. But second theme then, as to whether or not people can actually better their lives with that agency. We pushed to you the idea that one of the most important things in people's lives was relationships, that no one dies thinking, hey, I'm really glad I got promoted to partner, but rather that they die thinking, I hope I was a good wife, I was a good husband, I was a good parent that raised good children. And that means that relationships are comparable on their side of the house, are a metric of success that people use, and are something that you actually can improve with effort, get markedly better on our side of the house. On their side of the house, you don't try to communicate with partners through difficult times. You don't try to reach out to a rebellious teenager because you think that it is all random chance rather than a product of your own efforts. The majority of their material still standing this round is the idea of climbing social ladders, that you get more philanthropy on their side of the house. But what they fail to recognize, and that we've pointed out to you and they've given no response to, is the idea that moral desert was manufactured to protect class interests. It was not that moral desert created those class interests. People had incentives to hold on to their wealth, and they created narratives like these ones in order to justify that. In the absence of this narrative, they would find another one because what is inherent is a desire to keep that wealth rather than donate it to enjoy the luxuries on their side. Finally, on the ideas of innovation, they don't do any engagement at all with the idea that we can hold power to account, that we can push society forward when people feel like their actions have consequences, and the ability to make a good impact on their side of the house. Corrupt leaders can get away with hiding money mismanagement by saying it was the flux of the economy. They can point to random chance to do things like wave away the impacts of climate change, when in reality, there are real and tangible things that they could do to improve our lives, to make the world better, to actually have an impact on our circumstances. When everything is a lottery on side proposition, most tickets are a losing one. Most tickets mean that people feel powerless, they feel hopeless, they feel like they're not in control. And that is what they fail to recognize. And that is why they've lost this round.
I thank the op reply to end this Octofinals. I call it prop reply. Here.
Hi, sorry, checking that I'm both audible and visible.
You are audible, but a little bit low on the video, if that's okay.
Amazing, yeah.
All right, perfect.
Speak panel, I agree with Team Canada. Life is a lottery and most people lose that lottery. Here then is the difference between both sides of the house. On theirs, you are told it is your fault that you lost this lottery. You didn't work hard enough. It's just your fault that you didn't do enough. On our side of the house, the onus is pushed onto systems. The onus is pushed onto powerful people who on our side of the house uniquely have the imperative to actually change the system to ensure that more people start winning at life. 2 questions from Team India. First, on which side is better for marginalized minorities? Second, on what is success and how do people actually engage with it? On the first question, a very important mechanism that we pushed since first is that rich people can no longer justify their wealth because they can't claim they're more hardworking than you. They can't just say that they earned it. Canada responds to one of the impacts here on people being more willing to support affirmative action and redistribution. They say that the rich make up new narratives. Crucially, they never tell you what these new narratives are. But even if the rich make up new narratives, you have to look at this round on comparative. This is the strongest, most entrenched narrative that exists in society right now, which will always be more pervasive than this random narrative that they come up with, which they crucially just never tell you what it is until like a third of it at like third prop. But second, here is what the independent path to victory that they don't respond to stemming from this MAC is. What goes woefully unresponded to is that minorities on our side of the house can galvanize around this. At the point at which they feel broke, and the point at which they feel like they were oppressed and these systems are the ones doing that, that's when they can collectivize under just anger and snatch back their rights. This fundamentally goes woefully unresponded to on their side of the house and wins us this debate. Because let's just take a second to weigh against this norm of agency. Here's the problem with what they tell you on their side of the house. First, as third proposition concedes, most people just treat off agency all the time. We don't see why this is the tipping point to you feeling like your life is meaningless. But again, as we've told you since first proposition, and which they assert that reassert, we think that there are several norms in society which make you want to work hard. Things like a capitalistic system, which means you still have an incentive to compete, which means you still have an incentive to move forward. Just that our narrative is more nuanced than what Canada gives us credit for, and that reasonably means that we can exist with both cooperatively. I think that that is the characterization that they needed to contend with. But in our absolute worst case, look, most people just can't access this sense of agency because we've characterized down the line when you are living hand to mouth and paycheck to paycheck, you as a really poor person don't feel a sense of agency. So at best on their side of the house, they give you a feeling of agency. On our side of the house, we give you the tools to actually fight for your agency and enable the fight for our rights, which means we get concrete benefits uniquely on Team India. But second, we also told you about how their side of the house delegitimizes minorities because they're told they don't succeed because they're lazy and they're hardworking. Again, they only respond to the other part of this argument. This goes completely unresponded to and also offers us an independent path to victory. Contrary to what they tell you, and as Siddhisha explains, the reason the rich dude who finds some cash doesn't give it to the poor is because he thinks they're lazy. It's because he thinks they will waste it on alcohol. On our side of the house, you view them as victims. You view them as victims of systems that you profited off of, and that is uniquely the tipping point to why you actually do things like give them and redistribute towards them in the first place. We think that this is fantastic and is logically prior on weighing to everything that Team Canada tells you, and therefore we take it over them on this clash. Let's then move on to the second question on what is success and how do people engage with it. We've told you down the line that success is always seen as things like grades and money because we live in a capitalistic incentivized society, which sure, maybe in their best case, there's a narrative of family being important, but it is crowded out by a structure which is entrenched into our society in a more powerful narrative. But human nature is inherently competitive. You can compete on how much money you have. You can never compete on who is a better older brother. That is just not a calculation that people can make. What that fundamentally means is that all the harms that they run away from and how people are forced to aspire to a toxic bar, which is the reason Canada keeps on telling you the metric is not money, is actually true, and we take it over them in this round vote gov.
Thank you very much. Proposition reply. Thank you both India and Canada for what was truly an amazing debate. I believe the protocol now is for the judges to move to a separate